what he said. Hi, I'm Michelle. This is my so-called handmade life. I have a blog by the same name, and that is my name on Instagram. On Ravelry, I am Mamatronic. This is a knitting, crochet, handmaking, DIY, whatever I feels like talking about kind of podcast where I ask you questions and you respond in the comments. And the next episode, I talk about the things you spoke of. It's as much a conversation and a back and forth as I can do here on YouTube. In the last episode, I asked you what are some knitting or crochet dilemmas that you may have that you would like to work through here on the vlog or on my blog together. And you answered. I did what like any good writer or content creator or YouTuber that's worth their salt does with those queries, and I passed it to ChatGPT to answer for me. I'm going to bring this conversation that I had with the Matrix, I'm going to bring it to you now, kind of to compare ChatGPT's responses to what mine would be. As I typed in your questions, I didn't let my eyes even focus on what the answers were, though they looked lengthy, because I wanted it to be as spontaneous as possible. So they've worked really hard to make ChatGPT seem more human and sensitive, and it doesn't really work. So I decided to get a stand-in to read the part of ChatGPT, and it is the most emotive person. His voice rises and falls and undulates with such melody. My husband, Adam. And now you may know this about me. I'm very verbal, I'm an empath, and can sometimes be long-winded. I'm gonna try to water myself down with a little bit of roboticness. And I've found in real life that when I make it really brief, really dry and monosyllabic, I get the best response possible from my family. Anyway, don't you find you're more responsive when I'm just like, meh, yeah, meh, okay. So I'm going to try and water myself down a bit, and we are going to up the sensitivity quotient of ChatGPT with this voice actor extraordinaire. ChatGPT, how do I motivate myself to rejoin my knitting group?
Rejoining a knitting group can be a great way to reconnect with a hobby you enjoy and meet like-minded individuals. If you're looking for motivation to rejoin your knitting group, here are some tips that might help. Reflect on the benefits. Remind yourself of the opportunity. Use the knitting group as a chance to learn.
Do you really want to do it? Because I don't make myself do social things unless I really want to. So your gauge would be, I'm excited about it, I just feel tired, or I dread it. And let that guide whether or not you do it. But what if I'm shy?
If you're shy, it's understandable that joining or rejoining a knitting group might feel intimidating. However, there are ways to manage your shyness and still enjoy the benefits of being part of a group. Start with familiar faces. Communicate your concerns. Attend smaller gatherings or workshops. Volunteer for small tasks. Prepare conversation starters. Focus on shared interest. Take breaks when needed. Remember that knitting groups are often welcoming and supportive communities.
Okay, you are abbreviating big time, which is fine. That was super long. If you don't want to do it, but know you would like it, you just have a issue with introversion or being around people, but you know it's good for you and you should break that habit, bring a crutch friend. Kind of like what he said, bring a crutch friend. They can be a new knitter. They don't have to know how to knit, but somebody that just kind of helps you, like a security blanket. Or, this is my favorite, plan something that starts before the knitting night ends. That way you can leave and say, oh, I've got to go do this. It's totally the truth. You're not lying. And lastly, if you're just nervous about what to say, just ask people about themselves and what they're making. They love to talk. They will do all the talking for you, and they will love you for it. What's the best way to start a local knitting group?
Starting a knitting group can be a rewarding endeavor that brings together individuals who share a love for knitting. Define the purpose, gauge interest, determine logistics. Decide on the logistics of your knitting group, such as starting a knitting group requires patience and effort.
Wow. And that was abbreviated. I would just say start with some people that you know. Maybe put up a flyer in a library. See if the library or a community center will let you use their space. But honestly, if a restaurant patio will let you meet there, and maybe you can make it worth the waiter's while to come out and bring drinks and things, that's how people see your group. If you keep it really open and public, or like out in a park. I'm going to do something more about this in the future, but that's just my off the cuff answer. And obviously, if you have it in a yarn shop, that's cool, but sometimes people feel bad not buying, or they're tempted to buy. So free stuff might be easier. And if it starts with a group of friends, quickly move from a texting thread where you're all talking to each other to like something neutral on Facebook, so it doesn't have like an in crowd that excludes anyone. Why do I have to work instead of stay home and knit all day?
The decision to work instead of staying at home to pursue your knitting hobby all day is a personal choice that depends on various factors. While knitting can be a fulfilling and enjoyable activity, there are several reasons why people choose to work. Financial stability, professional growth, social connections, personal fulfillment beyond knitting. Everyone's circumstances and priorities are different.
Wow, super diplomatic answer. Don't want to offend anyone. You got to work so you can afford all that yarn, girl. Why can't there be more hours in the day to knit?
It's understandable to wish for more hours in a day, especially when you have multiple interests and responsibilities. However, the numbers of hours in a day is a fixed constraint that applies to everyone. Here are a few reasons why the numbers of hours in a day remain unchanged. Biological needs. Remember that finding balance is the key.
Oh my gosh, you read like half of that answer. Okay, mine.
Not even half.
Because you chose to live by the Gregorian calendar. Why can't I create my own calendar system and live by that?
While it's theoretically possible to create your own calendar, it's important to consider the practical implications and challenges that would arise from doing so. Here are a few reasons why creating your calendar system and living purposes within their cultural context.
It's okay. You'll lose friends. How can I limit the number of knitting projects I cast on ChatGPT?
Limiting the number of knitting projects you can cast on to can help you stay focused, manage your time effectively, and reduce the likelihood of unfinished projects piling up. Set project limits, prioritize and plan. Finish before starting new ones. Use project baskets or organizers. Practice self-discipline. Resist cast-on-itis. Seek accountability and support.
That's what I'm here for. Me and one of my viewers totally failed today. Tell people online you're going to be finishing all those projects. Say what they are so that if you don't, you are publicly shamed, because that is a huge motivator. And then take all of your unfinished projects and kind of lump them together in a big messy jumble in the middle of everything where they're easy to grab, but they also like annoy the heck out of you and your family, because that's another big motivator to finish. And then have like your car projects in the car, annoying everyone, like on the console, all tangled in the stick shift, and have your couch projects on your couch, because he loves it when this comes between us. And that way you'll be motivated to finish. And then have a reward. Every time you finish 3 things, treat yourself to something. And it doesn't matter what those things are. So you can start with something super easy, like, oh, I wove in 2 ends, treat. You know, you can do that too.
Couldn't you just make a video about all your unfinished projects?
Oh yeah, I'm going to do that.
Okay.
Okay. I've done that before too. Karen, you just got to stop. Did you like that cast-on-itis? You knew how to say it. How do I get motivated to finish UFOs?
Unfinished objects can accumulate over time, but with a plan and some dedication, you can work on finishing them. Assess and prioritize, break it down, create a plan, allocate dedicated time, limit distractions, stay motivated, seek help if needed, embrace the process, let go if necessary. Remember that finishing your UFOs is a journey and may take time and effort. Pace yourself, stay committed, and celebrate each completed project along the way.
Oh, that was super heartwarming. And the way you read it, especially. I basically say the same thing as the casting on too much, Macon. But I would add that if you watch some minimalist, anti consumerism, simple living YouTube videos regularly, it will also shame you into watching what you know, start on new things. You'll think about waste and you'll want to finish what you have and use what you've got, and it'll get all that good, healthy stuff drummed up inside of you. So I'm going to stop here and have a quick Fernwood break, because the next question that we posed to ChatGPT, totally, I am living it, Heather. And it's about gauge being all over the place. You know, I showed you my Fernwood cardigan, how I basically had a sleeve and part of a sleeve left. I totally screwed up my gauge as I knit. Probably it was too tight to begin with. Like, this kind of felt messy as I knit, but this is the perfect gauge. Don't look ahead. Don't look ahead. Spoilers. It was just, it felt weird. It was super thick, like almost like something that was meant to be really drapey that felted. It didn't feel right. And so I ripped the whole thing back with some help. He helped me rip the whole thing back and started over. And I'm this far along, and I'm definitely going to have enough yarn to finish because I got an extra ball from like Joanne. So that is an issue with me, my gauge changing, my knitting tension as I knit. So how do I keep my gauge from being all over the place?
Maintaining consistent gauge in your knitting is important for achieving the intended size and fit of your projects.
Gosh, that sounds like a 5-paragraph paper a kid wrote. In the beginning of time, maintaining gauge. Go ahead, sorry.
Use the right needles, swatch and block. Measure your gauge, adjust your tension, take breaks. Practice consistency, consider blocking. Take note of yarn and needle changes. Remember, achieving perfect gauge may not always be possible, but consistent gauge within a reasonable range is usually sufficient for most projects. Don't be hard on yourself.
I'm surprised. I don't think those are the greatest answers. Those are just how to make a gauge, swatch, and how to knit kind of answers. When your gauge is variable, I say make a really large gauge swatch. Like I usually would do 6x6, but sometimes I make it even larger. Keep in mind that the first few inches of something aren't going to have the weight to pull them down as you're knitting. So don't get too freaked out if it doesn't match your gauge. But I keep a gauge ruler normally. I can't find it right now, and I've had this broken tape measure with me for weeks. Keep a gauge ruler beside you. Okay, I see. Make this briefer, right? I sound like ChatGPT.
You sound more sincere.
This highlighted, this is the word, anal retentive. That's what I wrote, and I made it highlighted, anal retentive. That's the solution to your ever-changing gauge. Be anal. Keep your little stitch ruler gauge right beside you, and every inch or so, just check it. I'm just gonna check. And drive yourself crazy with it. Get some of those little plastic doodads, tubes that you can stick on your needles to spread out a sweater and try it on while it's in the process, and then obsessively try it on every few inches, especially after you finish the armholes. Really try on the thing. Use whatever you got to do to try it on and make sure it fits. And then if you have a sweater that's the same size you want it to be circumference-wise, keep it folded in your knitting bag and pull it out as a reference, just for a little added confidence. And then here's my biggest tip. This is a good one. Do not leave your knitting for more than a few days at a time, because when you come back to it, your gauge will be different if you're anything like me. ChatGPT, why does the gauge change with the circumference of my project?
Here are some reasons why gauge can vary: needle tension, stitch distribution, tension variation, stretching and distortion. To help maintain consistent gauge across different circumferences, swatch for each project, measure gauge in the round, practice consistent tension, check your gauge periodically.
Like, we'll see. When I'm knitting in the round, I'm usually doing knit stitches, not purls. Purls take more yarn. And so, if you are doing something in the round rather than flat, you're not going to have any of those purl stitches. So, because you're not going back and forth. So that might change your gauge. But I've also found that there's this thing like knit tiny, cute factor to doing a sleeve, because sometimes when you're knitting a sweater, it doesn't really read as around and around to you. But when you're knitting a little sock or a little sleeve, it just feels so, I don't know, it's almost hypnotic, you circle and you're spiraling, and I just knit tighter because it's this little tiny thing in front of me, and I think tiny, and that's stupid, but I think that's part of it for me. Does my gauge change when I'm stressed?
When you're stressed, your body can undergo physiological changes that may affect your knitting tension and impact your gauge. Tension and muscle tightness, breathing patterns, lack of focus and concentration, speed and rhythm. Here are some ways to mitigate it. Take breaks. Create a calm environment. Practice mindfulness. Set realistic expectations. And seek support.
If my gauge is too tight, I may have cancer.
No, having a tight gauge in your knitting does not indicate or suggest a presence of cancer.
So, like I said earlier, don't leave a project for long periods of time and then come back to it, because you're going to come back to it a totally different person, like a whole new version of you. I'm all different. It's like my signature changes over time. I may be all cool, chill, beatnik Michelle like one day, and then next week I'm like Chicken Little and I'm all stressed out. So, ChatGPT, where should I measure the yoke depth of my sweater?
To measure the yoke depth for your sweater, you'll want to measure from a specific starting point to a specific ending point. Find the pattern or instructions. Locate the starting point. Identify the ending point. Measure vertically and take note of the measurement.
My thoughts on this, and this really does merit like a whole video in and of itself, but your body size isn't going to change, so I would always have my body measurements ready if I were you. I, of course, don't ever do this, but from your neck line measurements to the depth at the front of the body, upper bust, full bust, armhole size, all of that handy. And then look at every pattern through the lens of your personal numbers and see where you can manipulate it. As far as like, if you have like a larger chest, you might want to add extra increases just to the front or maybe all the way around. I have really square shoulders. It just made things fit weird that were supposedly my size. Just taking all of that into account when you make a yoke. And or to be really brief, you could just take a really good class about it, like that one I took for the Illuminate yoke sweater by Andrea Mowry. I did that with Laura and Allison Party. Every possibility was covered, and there was really good worksheets that honestly I could apply to other sweaters. I'm not going to go into the stuff that I learned there because that's their thing, that's their business, but I found it really worth it, especially if you have like a sizing issue that's just really hard with did you lose your place? You're not much of a robot. But I don't know if you want to listen to me, because I did knit an entire sock and show it online with no heel turn. So, oh, Gail commented that she did that too. Like she finished 3 socks before realizing she hadn't put in the heel turn. So I'm not alone. ChatGPT, do knitwear designers measure the yoke differently from one another?
While there are common practices and standard measurements. There can be variations depending on the designer's individual style, aesthetic, and fit preferences. Here are a few factors that can contribute to differences in how knitwear designers measure the yoke. Design intent, body proportions, garment construction, design aesthetics.
I think some designers are most designers, especially in the past, they designed for themselves. So their body type was typically probably their first sample, and then they added to it, like added other sizes and different grading. But a lot of designers today are kind of taking advantage of the ridiculously oversized sweater trend to not have to worry as much about yoke sweaters fitting the shape of your body. I like oversized sweaters, but if you just say put a sack on it, you don't have to worry as much about fitting. But like all those measurements I talked about, a lot of patterns have wiggle room where you can knit the body one size, the sleeves a different size, or add a stripe of solid color where you do extra increases or something like that you can play with. Why do knitters and crocheters hate one another?
It's important to note that the notion that knitters and crocheters hate one another is not accurate or representative of the broader knitting and crocheting community. While there may be some lighthearted banter or friendly rivalry between knitters and crocheters, it's typically done in a playful manner.
So which one do you like best?
As an AI language model, I don't have personal preferences or feelings, so I don't have a favorite between knitting and crocheting. However,
Is that hitting home?
I like whatever you like. However, I can provide information and assist with questions or guidance related to both crafts.
Oh, I see. So you're just not going to tell me.
Apologies if my previous response didn't provide a direct answer. As an AI language model, I don't have personal opinions.
Where can I learn advanced knitting techniques?
There are several excellent resources available to learn advanced knitting and crocheting techniques. Local workshops and classes, online tutorials and courses, books and publications, online communities and forums, local knitting and crochet groups, craft retreats and conferences.
Yeah, obviously you can Google it and find something. But I know as far as books, when you want to do things like modify, especially like with sweaters, Amy Herzog's Ultimate Sweater Book is supposed to be really good. I haven't ever looked at it. I have Isolda's Little Red in the City. That was good about modifying. And there's some principles in, the principles of knitting and custom knits. But also in the classes like I took online, but also I think trial and error is a good way to learn advanced knitting techniques. It is kind of fun. Sometimes if I learn something by messing up on my own, I remember it better. If I knew what I know now when I first started knitting, what would I tell myself then?
Here are a few things you might consider sharing. Start with simple projects. Practice patience. Gauge matters. Invest in quality tools and materials.
If you go to Instagram to look for newer or lesser known designers, you might not find them because the algorithm is showing you popular posts. So they're probably not lesser known. But like going to Ravelry's Hot Right Now or looking at new patterns, especially free ones, sometimes you find up and coming designers because they're making their first few patterns kind of free until they catch on. That's one way. And then also just doing a really deep dive in advanced searches. Now, if you can't use Ravelry, that kind of would suck. You couldn't do it. But doing an advanced search on types of knitting, because you can search like cables or this or that and look for a style of knit that you like and then run through it, all the designers, and see, you might find one you don't know. ChatGPT, what is a good border to put on a shawl with different colored ends hanging from the edges to hide those ends?
There are a few border options you can consider. Applied I-cord border, garter stitch border, slip stitch or mosaic border, lace border, crochet border, applied fringe. When selecting a border, consider the style and design of your shawl.
What are some patterns that have multicolored fringe on the edge of the shawl?
Find Your Fade by Andrea Mowry, Dotted Rays by Stephen West, Free Your Fade by Andrea Mowry, Wingspan by Malin Tricotery Designs. Painted Desert Shawl by Kirsten Bishop.
I would say the ones I thought of were Bluegrass, Excavation, I don't know how to say this, Onisidora, and the Shortest Day Shawl. All of them have all the edges, like different colors, just hanging as a fringe. Either grouped together like little tassels or just hanging as fringe. Maybe trying something like that would work. Should I block a shawl before adding the border?
Yes, it is generally recommended to block a shawl before adding a border.
Yeah, I'm just going to stop it. I would, especially if you decide to add a crochet border to a knit shawl or the other way around. And you said your yarn wasn't as forgiving, Ophelia Bells. So I don't know if by that you mean it doesn't have stretch or it just shows the woven in parts. But if things aren't stretchy, I would, if you're doing something stretchy with something not stretchy, I would definitely block out the stretchy thing first, then add whatever is not stretchy. But even like if you were using cotton or a blend, an acrylic blend that doesn't have a lot of give to it, sometimes just blocking it might help. I don't know, make it easier to see your pickup stitches and neatly add your border. Should I use the 3 skeins I have to make something or buy 3 more skeins to go with it and make a larger something?
Deciding whether to use the 3 skeins you already have or purchase 3 more to make a bigger project depends on a few factors. Project vision, yarn availability, budget, versatility, personal preference. Ultimately, the decision depends on your specific circumstances and priorities.
I say yes, do it especially if it'll get you to free shipping. But if you have to add stuff you don't really want to your cart to get free shipping, don't. It's a trap. Is it still stash busting if I use stash, but also buy more yarn to go with it?
The concept of stash busting typically refers to using up the yarn you already have in your stash rather than purchasing new yarn. However, there are different approaches to stash busting. In the scenario you described, where you need to buy more yarn in order to use the yarn in your stash, it may still be considered a form of stash busting with a modified approach.
I'll take it. How long does yarn have to be in my possession to be considered stash?
The duration of time required for yarn to be considered part of your stash can vary depending on individual perspectives and definitions. Generally, yarn is considered part of your stash once you have acquired it with the intention of using it for future projects.
What do you think? Is it stash immediately?
I think if you stash it away, it's stash.
Okay. Are you wishing I would stash more away? I say,
where would we stash
as
more
soon
away?
as I say, shut up. As soon as it's lost its new yarn smell, it is stash. Okay. Thank you, ChatGPT. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. Maybe you can come back some other time and give no real opinion on unpopular opinions in the knitting world.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do a meme. We can be meme-tastic together. I'm done with you.
Okay. Did I ham it up?
No, you did a good job. You didn't. I was afraid he would read ahead and like try to use emotion. I was a little worried about that because, you know. Okay, so you can do what you need to do. Let me just say, I do have an FO, but I can't show it. I'm just going to show you the cables. That's the lately pullover that I was showing you last week. It was last week. Yes, because I'm doing it every week. Okay, I'm just going to show this much. I've actually finished it and blocked it, but I just want to wait to reveal it when the pattern is released because that's the right thing to do. But let me just say, I loved it. It was good. And I did start to have, Heather, some of those gauge issues with my tension changing as I knit. I went from loose to tight to loose. And the cable panel on this sweater just makes it a little harder to constantly measure that area for gauge. So like every time I measured stuff on the sides, I was coming up with the right gauge, but not so much in the center part, and it kind of drew things up and in. It all worked out fine. And I modified by adding a little link just because my torso is kind of long. So everything was perfect. And oh my gosh, I love it. It's a great design. That's by Shannon Cook, and it should be coming out any day now. But about my fern lid, let's see. Oh, the camera is far enough back in here that I can try something on. I don't have my bands yet, but I totally feel like this looks better. This just looks like and I'll have my ribbing here and my pockets, my little pocketies. So I think this looks the fit. I don't know. You wouldn't be able to tell, and I don't have the sleeves on, but when I put the sleeves on in that last episode, I thought about as I pulled it on, this isn't roomy enough. I want to be able to throw this over a long sleeve shirt or a long sleeve shirt, a sweatshirt and a t-shirt. And I don't know that I can. So I started all the way over. I ripped it back and my husband helped me. And I was going to be so discouraged to wake up the next morning and have to start all over again. And I said, he was ready to go to bed. I was like, can you just let me rip some of this back so I'm not super discouraged tomorrow? And he was like, I'll help. And so he did the plucking. It kind of created gave it some relaxed slack so that I could do the rolling. And now I have several mega balls of this Lion Brand Thick and Quick in raisin colorway. I am so much happier with this. So Heather, it was just very timely that you mentioned gauge being all over the place because I struggle with that constantly. It literally just depends on the day of the week that I pick my needles up. And I have to be very careful. So, I have my little light that I use, and I have some sort of tape measure or ruler with me all the time. And I really do. I stop and measure. And for this one, especially, measuring the stitch count is important because that's what was so off. But if my row count also changes, I know my stitches probably have too. So I don't know. That's pretty much it. That's all I've got this week because what I did was work on more website stuff all week. I got really close to finishing this and then ripped the whole thing back and started over. That's pretty much all I've worked on. So with all of that talk about, I just guess I had to do get the AI thing out of my system. I've seen people have ChatGPT design a sweater for them. In fact, when it first came out, my husband was like, you should get it to design a sweater. But I just had so little interest in it. And I haven't really used it myself, except when I had some website questions about the back end of WordPress. I was on some forums, I couldn't get a response. I actually did use ChatGPT, and it kind of helped me know where to look for another answer. So I guess it was kind of helpful in that respect. But you can see it sounded really like bland blog post answers to most of those questions. Though some of it was, useful, truthful information. What do you think, your YouTube feed is probably full of AI, this and that. How do you think the future of knitwear design will be affected by AI? And then how will it change the way you create things? Or do you think it will? And then if you have any other thoughts about anything discussed here, always leave a comment and I will get back to you quickly. You all have a good week. Bye. Talk again.
Okay, I'm talking. Should I talk like a robot? Should
No.
I talk like a robot?
Stop.
Knitting and crocheting are both forms of fiber arts that involve creating fabric with yarn and needles or hooks.